matters. So what has mattered and what matters?
Well, we are into minicamp this week. So it's all mandatory this week, which means the attendance should be where you want it to be, which will give you a much clearer picture of what everybody is doing when everybody's on the field. Obviously, there's going to be some injuries where guys are held out for cautious reasons. But, Dan, I think overall, kind of the two observations I've had from the 2 weeks of OTA are that when this defense is full and playing together, you're starting to feel them. And that's what you want, particularly from a unit that knows the system it's playing in, that has 9 of its starters back, that has a secondary that not only is pretty good, but is willing to tell you about how good they are when they make plays. And so there's an edge there. And then I think my takeaway for Caleb Williams is just having that reminder that we're back in line for the rookie roller coaster, which it's like hard to readjust your brain because we've done this so often and pivoted and this and that and the other thing. But you just have to remember that there's going to be days that look great, some days that are really bumpy, and over time you're just kind of trying to gather sample size so that you can see what it looked like in mid-May, how it progressed through early June, then what does it look like in late July and into mid-August as the season starts nearing, and trying to figure out just kind of how all those things match up as you try to get your rookie quarterback ready to play in week 1 of his rookie season.
Dan, we were talking about Pro Football Focus and their team rankings that came out last week, and they had the Bears ranked 20th. And I thought what was interesting about their analysis was something that we haven't spent a lot of time talking about, and that's the defensive line.
Yeah.
That they consider the defensive line to be a weakness. I know that we're in the part of the year where you have no idea who's doing what on the defensive line because they're not doing padded stuff. But is there an argument to be made that the Bears in the offseason didn't do enough to improve their defensive line? Or are the Bears saying the improvement's going to come from the experience of the guys we already have in the room?
Well, both can be true. And I think that argument can be made that maybe not enough was done. You used your resources where you used your resources, and you upgraded this football team to a point where the outside world thinks that they should be very competitive for the entirety of the 2024 season. Well, you still have some problems up front defensively, particularly if there's any sort of injury attrition that kind of waters down your depth there. We're still trying to figure out who is going to be the most reliable complementary pass rusher on the other side of Montez Sweat. We're still trying to figure out where the engine of the interior defensive line is going to be at the 3 technique position, with obviously a leap of faith being made inside the building on Gervon Dexter taking a huge jump in year 2. But I thought you said that very well there a second ago, Lawrence, that like at this time of year when you're trying to evaluate offensive and defensive linemen, it's just kind of a guessing game. You kind of shrug, and even the coaches will tell you, we really don't know anything until we cross that bridge in this year. It'll be a little bit earlier because of the Hall of Fame game. But when we start to get the pads on and have those live competitive practices where guys are able to hit each other and do some things, now we have a better way to gauge how much progress certain guys have made.
So when you talk about how the mandatory nature of this week and the who reports and how they look is going to mean something, are there any immediate depth chart changes when you say, look, this guy wasn't here, this guy wasn't here? Where are your eyes for who might be plugged in with the ones, the twos, et cetera?
Yeah, the depth chart isn't as much for me the primary focus, but I'll give you an example from last week. Like Caleb in the practice that we were able to observe last week looked really sharp in 7-on-7. He had some moments in 11-on-11. You go, that's good. That's what it's supposed to look like. And then you look down at the roster, and you're like, okay, Montez Sweat isn't here. T.J. Edwards is on the sideline for the day with some sort of injury. 4 of your 5 secondary starters are gone in Gordon, Brisker, Jalen, and Kevin Byard. And so then all of a sudden the context that frame of the good day was in, you go, okay, well, let's see it when all these guys are challenging him the way they can challenge him in a mandatory period. Look, like I think on the defensive side of the ball, you feel pretty solid about what they're bringing back and where guys are going to play. And so I don't think there's a lot of guessing games going on, especially comparatively to other years where we've been trying to figure out, how is this going to solidify and who's going to fit in where. And then with the upgrades they've made on offense, you're just trying to get some of that cohesion, and I think offensive line-wise, Nate Davis hasn't practiced in the OTA practices that we've been able to watch. Darnell Wright missed at least one day, and we're not sure how many others. And so you're just trying to get those units to kind of come together and gel, particularly on the offensive line when you know that their success and their stability is going to be directly related to how quickly Caleb can get comfortable in playing at this level.
You mentioned the rookie roller coaster that you go on when you're talking about a young quarterback. We've talked about it before, but I really do think that the Bears have done a nice job of not messing around with Caleb, like making him the starter and all of those things. That being said, what do they expect? Like, and what's the process that's happening for any rookie quarterback at this time of year? Because I think it's important to remind people of that. And what is it that the Bears hope that they can accomplish with Caleb and between now and when things start in July?
Well, it's so funny because you go to a baseball game or a barbecue or something in the neighborhood, and people want to know, how's he look? How's he look? How's he look? And you're like, well, ask me that on like August 20th, because in the month of May for a rookie quarterback, it's like, is he calling the plays correctly in the huddle? And is he saying them quickly and assertively in a way where everybody knows what they're running and there's not, post-huddle realignment and chaos that you have to clean up? Is he able to kind of diagnose a couple things pre-snap? Is he understanding the concepts that you're putting in the classroom, going through and walk through and applying them in the field? It's all, really grindy, boring, mundane stuff that even to those of us who are out there all the time, you can't really gauge the progress because we're not in the huddle. We're not hearing them make those calls. And so the things that they're measuring Caleb Williams on are not the things that the outside world is curious in the spring and the early summer, and so it's just one of those things where it's just like, okay, we're going to get there quick. I promise you that, especially with the early training camp report date, that we're going to be in the thick of training camp really quickly, and then it'll be a time to kind of check in. But right now they're just trying to make sure that his comfort level is getting to where it needs to get before they break, obviously mandatory minicamp later this week, and then they'll have pretty much a rookie-focused OTA session next week that'll be almost all rookies. And then Caleb will go off into his little summer break, hopefully feeling like he's got his feet on the ground and is a little more steady.
Dan, this may be an odd question, but whose voices, as the Bears have practiced, are the most consistently audible to you?
Coaches or players?
Either. Like which? Because to me, it always says something. From wherever you are, however the wind is blowing, who do you hear?
Like when I reflect back on 2 weeks ago on the OTA they had out there where the defense played really well, I heard the secondary. And I really do think that unit is a group that is supremely confident in itself and is also, again, willing to talk about it when they make big plays. And I think that is a really good quality to have in a defense that's not only talented but has that edge. Eric Washington called it a saltiness. Some of his assistant coaches last week agreed that there's just kind of that passionate fire that comes out every time that they're together. And I think in the short term, in September and October, and hopefully not much longer than that, the defense understands it's going to have to be the engine of everything they're doing. And I think they've taken on that responsibility, and hearing some of that chirping, I think is refreshing to me because, again, it provides a vibe, and I think that edge is tangible when they're playing well and they're playing together, and again when they're all there, which hopefully for the next 3 practices we'll have most of those guys on the field together.
What do you think of Hard Knocks making the decision that the Bears are going to be the focus team this year?
I think it's going to be fun. I think it's going to be fun for all of us to get a little bit more behind the scenes content. I think they're going to have an opportunity to kind of pull the curtain back on some of the stories that they want to tell, which obviously the team control is paramount in that situation where you can kind of, shape your messaging how you see fit. And it's going to be interesting to see how they do that. I don't think that there was like this rush, like we want Hard Knocks. But once the decision was made that Hard Knocks is coming, I think they've welcomed it with open arms. And you heard some of that from Matt last week, where it's just like, we feel like we're at a really, meaningful and fun state of our program on the rise in year 3. And we're willing to share some of what we're selling here to the national audience. And so I think it's going to be really kind of cool to see what is selected and then kind of how it shapes what the outside world's perception is of the 2024 Bears.
Have you gotten any backstory, though? Like, I really want to know, was this Ted Cruz and Kevin Warren finally just telling, hey, George, we're doing this.
This is great for our brand.
This is great. Get over it. We're doing it. Like, what was the internal sort of political struggle, if it existed?
I got to get a little bit more info on that, but I will tell you this. When we were in Orlando for the league meetings in March and the obligatory question came up to the leaders that were there, Kevin was the one that kind of did not put up any sort of stop sign or even a yellow light on it. He was kind of like, oh, well, we'll see where it goes. And then, you know, you were like, oh, I think, you know, this could be a possibility. And then, you know, George and Ryan had their would rather not do it. And you were like, okay, well, maybe they're going to resist the same ways they've always resisted. Now they're here and there's no turning back, and it's been announced and it's been decided. And now you've just got to figure out how to deal with that added presence. And Matt was part of this in Indianapolis with the in-season version his last year with the Colts. And he said, look, like there are certain things that you learn from the experience that you have to be a little more mindful of. Conversations you have where you might want to make sure that you're fully in private before you have it, even though you do have some editorial control. And so they're just going to have to figure out how to embrace this and make the best of it while those cameras and those mics are everywhere.
What do you make of this big deal that Justin Jefferson signed? And this division has got some players in it. It's going to be a tough ride.
No doubt. And I saw that this morning and I was like, man, guy got paid, right? And deservedly so. You're obviously seeing this offseason with some of the receiver contracts that are being signed, that market is changed dramatically versus 6-7 years ago. And DJ Moore is probably the next in line in the building at 1920 Football Drive to, put some pressure on Ryan Poles and his front office to say, okay, you know, I've got 2 years left on my deal, but if I keep playing the way I'm playing, when we get to the end of this year, I certainly expect to, go into 2025 with a new contract. And so he's got to be having a really fun private celebration about what these numbers now look like, because it's resetting the market in a way that should be really, really rewarding if he continues to produce. And as we've seen, it doesn't really matter who's playing quarterback when DJ Moore's on the field. He's going to produce with whoever it is. And so he gets another chance to adjust to Caleb Williams, who conceivably could be the most gifted quarterback he's ever caught passes from.
I know you said you're not focused on the depth chart, but I'm interested in where the running backs line up, in that we've got a change to the kick return rules that may affect special teams roles and have a propagating effect on some of that. And when you have one running back who doesn't really figure in the passing game the way someone else might, all the wonderful stuff that we heard, Roschon Johnson, and he was fine. You know, he was a guy. And Khalil Herbert's fast, but has some flaws. I don't know how Waldron looks at these guys. Is Kari Blasingame going to be on this team?
It's a good question. And, you referenced the new kickoff rule in there, and I think that's fascinating. You talk to people around the league about, we're talking about roster spots like 48 through 53 here, but those are special team spots. And you may be looking for different roster construction than you always have, because you're trying to add, 8 more kickoffs. And, so that's a coverage unit, it's a return unit. And you've got these new rules that change everything you do on that play in the game. And so you may be keeping more guys at certain positions than you ever have before, because it just caters to what those kickoffs will do. Richard Hightower was pretty forthright last week and saying, look, like this is kind of a bit of a guessing game for all of us. It's a little bit of trial and error and experimentation, and then obviously keeping our eyes on what other people around the league are doing to see what's working and what's not. And so this is kind of going to be fluid, Dan, through August as teams try to figure out, okay, what do these new kickoff rules really mean when it comes down to things like you're talking about, like roster construction and depth charts and who can help us in more phases. That's going to be fascinating. As far as the running backs go, it's going to be interesting to see what Shane does with DeAndre Swift and how often he wants him out there. I think there was some disappointment internally last year about the leap that they wanted Khalil Herbert to make as a protector and the development he actually did make. And so he may, have to fight to earn a spot, particularly with a new regime on offense. And so those will all be things that as we get into August will be, center of the radar, and we'll start to get a feel for how the new coaching staff feels about that position on that side of the ball.
Dan, as always, we appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
You got it, fellas. Have a good week.
That's Dan Wiederer of the Chicago Tribune.